Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.
You see, the people who oppose educational opportunities say, just give us some more time, we'll fix it. But our children only have 1 year in each grade. And every year that's wasted is a year they can never get back. I don't think any of us favor that.
Iowa has moved from being a national leader in education to being among the average over the past 2 decades. In response to this downward trend in Iowa's standing, Governor Terry Branstad called for an education summit to discuss ideas with business and education leaders on what can be done to make Iowa an educational leader again. On July 25th in Des Moines, various speakers, including New Jersey Governor Christie, Asia Society's senior advisor Vivien Stewart, Finnish education expert Pasi Sahlberg, and the 2010 National Teacher of the Year, Sarah Brown Wessling, spoke at the Iowa Education Summit. Here are remarks from their presentations. This is Intelligent Talk Television.
It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce my friend, the Governor of New Jersey, the Honorable Christie. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Governor Branstad, for the introduction, and thank you to all of you for caring enough about this issue that is so central to our state's future and our country's future to commit your careers to it and to commit your time to it today. You know, I think we spend a lot of time on this issue, unfortunately, talking about the things that we disagree about. We spend a lot of time focused on the issues that divide us in terms of the future of the educational system of our country. And I think as we move towards a very key time in our country's history, with governors across America looking for ways to try to improve educational opportunity for all of our children, regardless of where they live, that we need to start focusing more on the things that unite us. For instance, there's been great conversation across our state in my first year as governor about the fact that I cut $820 million from the K-12 education budget in New Jersey. I did. I did because I had to. I did because I had an $11 billion budget deficit, and that nearly 1/3 of the money that we spend in our state budget is spent on state support of K-12 education. So if you have an $11 billion budget deficit, it's like, you know, it used to be said about why you rob banks. You know, you rob banks because that's where the money is. And in New Jersey, the money has been spent in public education. There's been less time, though, spent in the last number of months talking about what we've done since that time. This year, we increased funding to K-12 education, as Governor Branstad mentioned, by $850 million in a budget that we kept level in overall spending year to year. Now, what's that tell us about what should unite every aspect of this discussion about educational reform and improvement? I don't oppose funding public schools, and I don't favor the privatization of public schools. I'm a product of the public schools in my state. I dealt with a difficult economic and fiscal circumstance and did so in a straightforward and honest way, and got great opposition for doing it in certain quarters because we try to demonize each other. And they say, well, I cut that money because I hate public education. I cut that money because I had to balance the books. And the proof of that is not that I said it at the time, and there are plenty of people who are unwilling to take me at my word. The proof is what I did the next year when economic times were better. I restored every dollar of that cut and added an additional $30 million. Now keep this in context. This is in the context of a state that in the year where I cut the $820 million, where we spent $25 billion in that year on K-12 education. Nearly $10 billion from state resources and $15 billion from property taxpayers in New Jersey. In New Jersey, we spend $17,800 per pupil per year. It is the most of any state in America. And that's before the $850 million that I added this year. I would think that that's a place where we start right there, where we can find unity. We can find unity over the fact that everyone in New Jersey, and I suspect nearly everyone in Iowa, wants to invest in our children's future. So let's put aside the hyperbole about who likes or dislikes public education. I'm putting the money of the people of our state where my mouth is and increasing aid to K-12 education to record levels, more than was being spent on the day I became governor in January of 2010. Now the question is, how do we spend that money? Not whether we should spend that money. How do we spend that money? And let me give you a few examples from New Jersey about why the time for change is now. In the city of Newark, our largest city, we spend nearly $24,000 per pupil per year. And for the children who entered high school this past academic year, 23% of them will graduate in 4 years. 23%. And of that 23%, of the ones that go on to pursue higher education, 95% of them will need at least 1 year of remedial training to qualify to sit in a college classroom. That's an obscenity. It's an obscenity in terms of our resources that are wasted, but to me, much more importantly, it's an obscenity for the children of Newark and their families who are being consigned to that failure because of their zip code, because their economic circumstances do not permit them to make any other choice except to send their children to failure factory after failure factory. In the city of Camden, in the shadow of Philadelphia, we spend nearly $20,000 per pupil per year, and we have astonishing rates of failure, even worse than those in the city of Newark. In the city of Asbury Park, which some of you might be familiar with from Bruce Springsteen fame, the greetings we bring you from Asbury Park, New Jersey now are much different than the greetings that Bruce brought you in 1973. We spend nearly $30,000 per pupil per year in Asbury Park. And the last full academic year of testing that was available shows that less than 50% of the high school students can do math at an 8th grade level. At an 8th grade level. Now, I don't know how you define failure, but that seems pretty clear to me to be the definition of failure. Forget about who you want to blame for a second. Forget about whether you want to blame the local board of education, or the school superintendent, or the local district principals, or the teachers in front of the classroom, or the parents at home who don't care enough, or the kids who may not study enough. Let's put that aside for a second, and let's see what we can agree on. Can't we agree that that is failure? And that when you're confronted with that measure of failure, you need to do a self-examination and to bring about change? Yet in the yelling and screaming that's going on about education in this country, we miss that. That is failure. And that failure has real-life ramifications for those children. They are the ones whose future are now restricted by the fact that if they even get a high school diploma, the one that they get doesn't represent a true high school education, and they are limited in what they can do with their futures. Think of the parents who have no choice but to sit by and watch as their children are consigned to a life of grave limit in a country that is supposed to stand for a future that's limited only by your God-given gifts and your willingness to work as hard as you can to make the most of those gifts. How can we live in a country that's permitting that to happen right under our nose while we spend a king's ransom for that failure? You see, the people who oppose educational opportunities say, just give us some more time, we'll fix it. But our children only have 1 year in each grade. And every year that's wasted is a year they can never get back. I don't think any of us favor that. And if we don't, then maybe we could stop the arguing and bickering for a little while. Maybe we can put aside the personal self-interest of unions and politicians and decide to figure out what unites us and decide to take some risk, political risk, on both the politicians' part and on the part of those who jealously defend the status quo. To say that change is necessary does not mean you hate public education. And to say that change is necessary does not mean you're giving up on your profession. It is simply an acknowledgement of the truth. A truth that is displayed by the statistics I read about today in terms of where Iowa's education has gone in the last number of decades. A truth that's displayed in the eyes of the children I see at the Science High School in Newark, a specialty public school where 100% of the children go on to college. Those are eyes filled with hope and optimism in the middle of a sea of despair. That's what education provides for those children, and that's what it provided for all of us. You see, the America that I know and I believe, no one is guaranteed anything except an opportunity to use your God-given gifts as best you can. If we do not come to grips with the fact that we are denying that most basic American promise to millions of children in America today because we are unwilling or unable to make adults uncomfortable in favor of giving children a new chance, then we are going to fail as a great society in the years to come. It is uncomfortable, and it is difficult, and it is emotional, because we all care deeply about this issue. And we can fight about it for years and years to come if that's what we choose to do. And there are passionate people on both sides of the issue. Or we can decide today that the interest of these children is more important than how we define political winning and losing. So I came to Iowa today not to throw down the gauntlet of the next battle in this fight, although it is a battle I am willing to have if forced to. came to Iowa today at the invitation of a governor who has a reputation throughout his career of bringing people together, which is why I believe Iowa's turned to him once again during some of our most difficult times to bring us together again as a people. Because we must find common ground on this issue, because the clock is ticking, everybody, and children's lives are wasting as we dawdle. I don't have to win every argument. I haven't won every argument in New Jersey, and I don't expect I will. But the principles that we talked about today should be things that we can agree upon and find principled compromise to accomplish. Understanding that there are no guarantees of success, but that if we stay on the course we're on today, there is a certain guarantee of failure for our children and for our country's future. So I hope, as you've been listening today to the various people who have spoken to you, and as you continue to listen and as you leave here from this summit, you will leave here continue to be committed to public education and the greatness of public education in America, and that your mind is opened just a little bit to the idea that change is necessary. It will be difficult and painful and challenging, but the only thing worse will be a continuation of a failed status quo that will inevitably lead to America being a second-rate intellectual and economic power in the world. And if that happens, the great morality that America projects across the world will be lost at the same time. And then the world will be a lesser place for our unwillingness or inability to act. I want to thank you for your commitment to this important issue. I want to thank the governor for his invitation to be here, and I look forward to watching the magic that I am sure will happen in Iowa as you return to become one of the best public education systems in America once again. Thank you all very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Vivien Stewart.
Good evening. It's good of you to still be here. I've been asked to talk about the educational transformations in China over the last 40 years in 10 minutes. That's quite a challenge in itself, so I will be using a PowerPoint, but I'll try to also speak it through for those of you who can't see quite so easily. 40 years ago, this was the economy of China. It was an agricultural subsistence economy. Today, this is the economy of China, rebuilding the San Francisco Bridge, having the largest solar panel industry in the world. 40 years ago, the majority of Chinese lived in the countryside, in villages or small towns. Today, the majority of Chinese live in large cities that are increasingly connected by faster trains than we have anywhere in the US. 40 years ago, this is what a school in China looked like. Today, and you'll have to forgive my amateur photography, Chinese schools have modern buildings, modern technology, well-trained teachers. And economists are having a battle about exactly which year will it be when the Chinese economy overtakes the United States as the largest economy in the world. Will it be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? So these things about China, the economic expansion is fairly well known. What is less well known is that their educational expansion has been equally dramatic. From the time of the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, which was a terrible time for the Chinese people, every school in the country was closed, teachers were sent to the countryside, often jailed. Essentially, there was no education in China for 10 years. But when new leadership came in and committed itself to a different path, to open markets, to westernization, to a different kind of system. From that point on, the Chinese have dedicated an enormous amount of their GDP to educational expansion, both at the national and the local level. So that by now, they now have 9 years of education throughout the entire country, and they are rapidly expanding upper secondary and higher education. As you can see, in the decade from the end of the 90s to 2010, their higher education population alone went from 6 million to 31 million students. So if the first phase was focusing on just creating the world's largest education system, the second phase, beginning in the early 1990s, has been to try and focus on improving quality and adapting what was a fairly traditional system to the modern world. And this has included efforts. They have a huge curriculum reform project going on, and they are having some of the same problems that we have with our curriculum reform, lots of disagreement about the direction of the reform. They decided, because China had been closed off for so long and they wanted to open up possibilities for Chinese students, that every student should learn a second language starting in elementary school. Most of that is English, but somewhere in China you can find schools teaching every language in the world. They put a lot of effort into enhancing the quality of teachers in rural areas through subsidies and a lot of distance learning opportunities. They have attempted, and I'll come back to this later, to reduce the emphasis on the public university examination, which is a traditional part of Asian education systems and really is kind of a stranglehold over the system. I think one of the most interesting aspects is what China is doing with its migrant children. Now, these are not international migrants, they're internal migrants, but there are 300 million people who've migrated from rural areas to cities in China over the last decade. It's the biggest human migration in history. Everything to do with China is the biggest ever. And for a long time, those children were not really in school in urban areas. They are now all in schools, but many of these schools are weak because essentially these children have come straight off the farm into a school. So now, starting in Shanghai, but now going around the whole of China, they are developing a policy in which every high-performing school in China is expected to adopt a low-performing school. The principal is supposed to work with the principal of that school. The teachers are supposed to help with professional development. The students in the high-performing school are supposed to tutor and mentor students in low-performing schools. It's considered part of your social responsibility to do this, and that is their low-performing school strategy. They're trying to modernize their classroom teaching practices, moving away from the lecture in front of the classroom to the kind of project-based instruction that our best schools do. Now, we don't have many indicators of what the quality of education in China is right now, except that in 2009, for the first time, the province of Shanghai participated in the PISA results, and they came out on top in all three subjects by a lot. Now, Shanghai is not the whole of China. It is the leading edge of China, but I think it gives a sense of the ambition and the standards that they are aspiring to. And if that wasn't enough, their next 10-year education plan proposes to continue to build on this work to include universal 1 year of preschool, having 90+% of students complete upper secondary education by 2020, which means that if we don't shift our dropout rate, China will be graduating a higher proportion of its cohort from high school than we will, and they, of course, have cohorts that dwarf our cohorts. There's also a big commitment to equity. I think in their rush to modernization and to a form of capitalism, they've created big inequities in the country, particularly the rural-urban ones, and so there's a big emphasis now on sort of redressing that balance through teacher policy and through financing policy. So what are some of the things that have enabled this really extraordinary development of an education system? Well, I think having a bold long-term vision for education as being the way to raise millions of people out of poverty, to go from an agricultural economy to a modern science economy, and to develop a middle class. That's been a very consistent, and you see it at every level of the Chinese system. Secondly, they have very rigorous standards, at least in math and science. It's still a rather narrow curriculum. It doesn't have the breadth of our curriculum. But the science and math standards, every student in secondary school has to take 4 years of math and 4 years of science. Every elementary school has specialized math and science teachers. In fact, they can't understand how we can teach math and science in elementary school since we don't have math and science teachers, is the way they look at it. You can't get out of math and science. You really have to. It's a very, very strong core curriculum. They also have a coherent teacher development system. Teachers are actually admitted to university before people who want to study other subjects as a way of trying to give an incentive to people to go into teaching. And once they're in the classroom, they have this traditional system now modernized in which the master teachers in each school every week meet with the younger teachers to work on improving instruction. And they do research as teams and so on and so forth. So it is the kind of job-embedded professional development that Jean Wilhoit was talking about. Time on task. The Chinese school year is 2 months longer than the American school year, and Chinese students spend most of their out-of-school time studying. This is a somewhat sort of debatable issue because a lot of it is exam preparation and test preparation, and there's a lot of complaints on the Chinese ministry website from parents and students about the amount of time they have to spend studying for exams. And that's clearly something they are going to look at. But the belief that effort and hard work and merit will pay off is clearly a powerful driver of student achievement, I think in all of the Asian systems, but you see it very strongly in China. People tend to think, well, it's sort of easy to have massive change in China because you've just got a central government that dictates what everybody does. And that's just not how education works in China. The reason they were able to move so fast is, yes, they had national direction and standards and a sort of sense of where they were going, but they basically said to every local community, we are going forward with education, you need to build yourself a school. And so they have a sort of a national framework, but lots and lots of local engagement. And finally, another thing that's striking and even ironic about China, given how closed off from the world it was for such a long time, Chinese educators are much more international in their orientation than most educators in the US. For any policy change, the ministry will send teams of people around the world to look at different practices in different countries and bring them back and decide what to adapt. And sometimes the adaptations are a little strange. When I'm shown an adaptation, I don't necessarily recognize it, but the point is that they are scouring the world for the best ideas. They're also trying to encourage many of their teachers and principals to go and look at how teaching is done and how schools are led in other countries. And for students, they all study world history, world geography, they all speak a second language. Chinese students know much more about the rest of the world than the vast majority of our students do. And they have this very sort of conscious idea that they're preparing students to live in a globally interconnected world. Well, China is not without its problems, and like the good things in China, the bad things in China are also huge. The rural-urban gaps are enormous and the cause of a lot of political unrest. The Chinese Ministry of Education asked for people to just comment on its website on their new education plan, and they got, of course, millions and millions of comments. And the majority of them were about the perceived inequities of people who live in rural areas and people who live in the cities, about the constraints of this university entrance examination, which is actually thousands of years old in origin, but which really constrains curriculum and innovation, and also puts a lot of pressure on students to study. And then the lack of creativity. You hear this search for creativity in every conversation in China, and that this is, of course, an area where they're looking to learn from the US. And finally, if you're expanding a system at breakneck speed, you're going to have capacity problems everywhere. They decide a direction and then they build the capacity and don't let the lack of capacity hamper them, but obviously in the short term it does. Harold Varmus, who's a Nobel Prize winner and one of the co-chairs of the President's Science Advisory Council, said in a speech last year to American scientists, in the 20th century, UK observers saw the US education system as surpassing that in the US. It's quite possible, in Britain, I'm sorry, in the 21st century, it's quite possible that we in the US may see China overtake us in education. I don't think, certainly China has a great passion and determination about education and has done a lot in the last 30 years. I don't think it needs to be the case that they will overtake us, or that that is even the right way to think about it. But we do, as everybody has said here today, need to get very serious about improving and adapting our schools, our schooling, our learning to the 21st century. I won't repeat what a lot of other people here have said today about the importance of having world-class standards, and not just in reading and math. I think they need to be in all subjects, because one of the strengths of our school system is the breadth of its curriculum. All the Asian high-performing countries are trying to broaden their curriculum, and while we have been narrowing it. Certainly a major commitment to elevating teaching and the quality of teaching, and a focus on students at the bottom, which is a major reason we don't do well in international assessments. But the other thing that I think is missing in most of the national conversation in the US about education reform is that it really doesn't yet have a global dimension. We haven't yet incorporated the idea that you do find in other high-performing countries, that the world is globally interconnected. That is going to be the lives our students will lead. And therefore, they need to know a lot more about the world. They need to know how to work on cross-cultural teams. They are going to need language skills. We need to be benchmarking ourselves not against the district or state next door, but internationally. And we need to be giving, I think all of our, with technology, there's no reason why we can't have global classrooms, why our classrooms can't be as wide as the world. There are, I know already, a number of schools in Iowa that are partnering with schools in other parts of the world, so that students and teachers and principals can kind of naturally begin to understand what is being expected in other countries, as well as how students can learn to cooperate with their peers in other parts of the world. So I will end there, and Jason should be somewhere to introduce the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Pasi Sahlberg.
Good evening. Tonight I would like to speak to you about my niece. She's 24 years old. Her name is Vera. And about 5 years ago, she came to me, and she was just finishing high school, and she said that I have decided to apply for primary school teacher education in my university in Helsinki. And Vera was a very good girl. She was a straight, like you say here, straight A student. She did figure skating, music, ballet dancing, anything that you can imagine a good girl would do. But she decided to go to teacher education. And she asked my advice, and I said, you don't need any advice, you just go there and everything will be fine. About 3 months later, she called me in tears, saying that she was rejected. And I said, what happened? And she said that everything went well. I went all the way through the final interview. You know, in Finland, all the teacher education candidates will be interviewed. So I was sitting there before the panel of 3 professors, and I said, so what did they ask you? And she said, they asked me all sorts of things, including, why do you want to teach? Because with your marks, you could easily go to law or medicine or business, anything you want to do. Why do you want to teach? And I wanted to know what she said. And she said that because my mother is a teacher, and my uncle, and my grandfather, and I love children. But that was not enough. So I happened to know these people who were sitting in the panel because I work in the same university. So I called my colleagues and said, do you remember this young woman who wanted to study here? And they said that yes, we do. And I wanted to know what she did wrong. And my colleague said that she didn't do anything wrong, except that she was not able to answer the question why she wants to teach. She was not alone. If you can see these, some of these images there, you can see that there were almost 5,000 other people who were not successful enough to make to primary school teacher education. So I got back to Vera and said that go back to school and try to teach for a year and see if you can learn something from this. And I would like to, if I can read you a letter that she wrote to me about this about 5 years ago. She wrote me a letter saying that, so why do I want to become a teacher? First is the internal drive to help people to discover their strengths and talents, but also to realize their weaknesses and inadequacies. I want to be a teacher because I want to make a difference to children's lives and to this country. My work with children has always been based on love and care, being gentle, and creating personal relations with those with whom I work. This is the only way that I can think will give me fulfillment in my life. So she applied again, and now she will be graduating from the same university this fall. So this is a story about my niece. So now you may wonder that why do these bright, talented high school graduates in Finland compete over a study place in teacher education. This spring we had 7,000 applicants. We have 8 universities that prepare primary school teachers, and we had 7,000 applicants, and only 650 will be accepted. So the competition is really tough. One reason there behind this interest among these young people is the salary. We are paying our teachers as if we pay any other college degree holder in other professions. The salary is not the main reason to seek for employment. It was not the main interest in my niece's case. But those who are considering teaching, they know that they will be paid as they were paid in other fields. As you see that in your country, the situation is very different. You are, according to the OECD statistics, you pay about 58% of the average college degree holders' salaries. The other, probably more significant thing and reason for look for employment in primary schools or Finnish schools is the teaching load. In this figure you can see how Finnish teachers' annual teaching load compares to the OECD average. So this is the average of the development countries, and you can see that in all the levels of education, teachers are teaching less than in most other countries. I give you here the figures from this country, and you can see the even bigger difference. In other words, in Finnish schools, if you get a job in primary school, for example, your teaching load is relatively less than in most other countries. And now you may wonder, what are these teachers doing when they are not teaching? When your colleagues, when you are teaching, Finnish teachers are doing something else. I'll tell you about this in a minute. Well, I told Vera also, my niece, that when she starts teaching in a Finnish primary school, she will be working in a very different environment and conditions than most others. I'm giving you 3 examples how the Finnish educational environment is different to what I call here a global environment. First of all, in many countries, we hear now talks about standards and testing. Standards means that somebody else creates the expectations for teaching and learning, and somebody else will come and measure if this has been achieved or not. This is not the case in Finland. We don't have national standards, nor do we have national standardized testing. These are both teachers' jobs. And when my niece has been studying during his 5 years of academic studies, curriculum planning, curriculum theories, and also evaluation and assessment and testing have been a big part of her studies. So she is prepared to do these things on behalf of her school, together with her colleagues in the school. This is the image. I don't know how many of you can see this, but this is something that well illustrates how many Finnish educators and teachers think about standardized testing. There's a picture of the examination board and the different animals. There's I think there's a penguin, a monkey, and elephant, goldfish, dog are taking a test. And the examiner says that for the sake of fairness, you all have to take the same test. Climb the tree. And this is how many Finnish teachers see the standardized assessments, that you cannot really, it's very difficult to assess or examine people using exactly the same type of assessment. Thank you. The other thing that makes our schools and Vera's work in Finnish primary school very different is the drive of equity. We want every school and every individual to be successful. Actually, the Finnish education reform since 1970s has been driven by the principle of providing equal educational opportunities for everybody and making sure that everybody will be successful. Our education system is not built around competition or race between teachers or between schools. It's more about collaboration and seek for equity. Thank you. And if you ask my niece, this is one of the reasons, and as you can probably hear from her letter, why she wants to teach. She wants to make a difference in her country and among the people that she's working. And then the last and third one, globally, there's a lot of talk about accountability. In many places, this accountability is organized through tests, so that teachers and schools are held accountable for students' learning. Finnish language doesn't actually have term accountability. So we don't have any accountability. We talk about responsibility within the school, where teachers are responsible for themselves and the principal and parents and students of what they do. Of course, it's accountability technically, but we don't have this word. I think if you ask any Finnish teacher about their opinion about accountability that you have, for example, in your schools, many of them would raise a question that how do you avoid the situation that teachers would be teaching to the test? This is something that is absent in our schools. Teachers never teach to the test because we don't have any tests. We have assessments, but they are teacher-made assessments, and why should any teacher teach for her own assessment or test? Now, this is the quiz question of the evening. Can I have this? I don't know if you can read this, but I wanted to ask you to see these words and guess who is the person who said this, who raised this concern that one thing I never want to see happen is schools that are just teaching to the test, because then you're not learning about the world, you are not learning about the different cultures, you are not learning about science, you are not learning about the math. This is your President Barack Obama in a town hall in March when somebody asked the question what he thinks about this testing through her own children. And I think this is a very telling example that when we put our own children at the picture, we think like your president, and we raise concerns about the role of testing and standards in the school. So let me get back to Vera and finish here. What she will do, what will happen to my niece when she will graduate in a few months' time? Well, she will enroll in one of these schools that you see pictures of the new Finnish school buildings. And she will be very happy and proud to do this because she knows that teachers are really valued and respected in our society. She will not leave her job within the first 5 years. She will not leave her job within the next 15 years because she's committed to teach. The only thing we have to do is to make sure that she will continue to have conditions of this respect and professional prestige in her school. And this is what we are trying to do for Vera and all the other Finnish teachers. I wish you good luck with this, and I thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
Well, last but certainly not least, one of Iowa's own stars, Sarah Brown Wessling.
So tonight I want to talk a little bit about what we value. I think we've heard this word a lot today and in recent rhetoric about what we value in our classrooms, about value-added assessments, about Iowa values, in fact. I want to think about what we value, what we say we value, and then what we really throw in that bucket, right? And sometimes there's a difference. Sometimes we say we value things that are on the surface. We all know we value students who are lifelong learners. We value students who are self-actualized. We value individualized and personalized education for all of our students. But is that really what we throw in the bucket? Do our actions coincide with what we say we value? And I think that's what we need to talk about tonight. That's what we need to think about, and that's what we need to make sure that our conversations that happen as a result of this summit really focus on. The difference between what we say we want and the actions we take to support those very values. So, too often, I think we value the thing, right? We find things to grasp onto. We find a program. We find a strategy. We find a book, right? We find the thing. And we use that thing and we implement it in our classrooms, and we think that the thing is going to solve all the problems. But the truth of the matter is that the things are never going to solve the problems, right? It's a process. It's how we do what we do every single day. Sometimes I think we get so obsessed with the idea of laying everything out perfectly ahead of time that we never are willing to risk failure. And if we don't risk failure, we preclude our opportunity to innovate. It won't happen. Sometimes I think we kind of have this confused. I think if we teach to all of the parts of something, right? If we take a standard and we break it down into benchmarks, we break it down into grade level expectations, we teach to all of those little parts, then we're going to equal the standard, right? But I think it's absolutely the opposite. I think it's entirely the inverse of that. We teach to the standard. We use the language of all of those different criteria in order to give our students feedback, in order to engage in a process. Because, folks, the process of being in the classroom, as you know, is mucky. My friend Kate and I talk about this every day. We're in the muck of the classroom, right? It's never efficient. It's never pretty. But it can never be, right? Because learning for us is never going to be laid out perfectly the way that we might hope that it would be. Some of you have heard me talk about my daughter, who has taught me so much about education. A while ago, she asked me if I wanted to play school with her. And I am a mother of a daughter who has been waiting for her daughter to ask her to play school. And so, of course, I said, yes, Lauren, I would love to play school with you. And I said, how do you play school, Lauren? She said, well, you can be the teacher and I'll be the student. And I said, well, I can be the teacher. What does the teacher do? She said, well, Mom, you'll give me something to work on, and then I'll go sit at my desk and do it, and then I'll bring it back to you, and you can tell me if I did a good job. And then you can give me something else to do, and I'll go sit at my desk and do it, and then I'll bring it back to you, and you can tell me if I did a good job. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have got the cutest 5-year-old ever, right? Until about 10 seconds later, when I was entirely mortified. Because I wondered, is this what my daughter thinks I do all day? Does she think that I hand out papers, pick them up, tell kids that they're good or bad or right or wrong? That is playing the game of school. That is not teaching. There is a profound difference between those two. And when we think about what we value, we have to think about the difference between playing the game and mucking around in the work of teaching and learning. We also have to remember to ask our students. We have to remember to ask our students how they learn, why they learn, what they want to learn. Their voices are perhaps the most crucial to bring to this conversation. We have to ask them what they think and how they learn. And I think if they were here right today or tonight, I think some of them would respond to this question. I think that Dylan would say, I need my teachers to be credible every single day. I think Ryan would say, I need my teachers to let me bring my own laptop to school every single day. I think Yasmina would say, I need you to know me at home first before you know me here at school. I think Tyler would say, let me be angry, let me be charismatic, let me be brilliant, and please just understand me. We have to ask them what they expect of us too. Of course, you know that there is all kinds of debate about what an effective teacher is, and certainly that's been part of our conversation today. When we think about effective teaching, so often this conversation kind of falls into two camps. The camp about recruitment, right? That we have to find the best teachers, recruit them, retain them, because they're born this way, right? Sounds like a Lady Gaga song, doesn't it? There's another camp, of course, that also advocates for teaching teachers, right? Well, as I go around the country and I entered this conversation at various points, I'm always so glad to be from Iowa. Because in Iowa, we know something about growing things, and we know that we must grow teachers. We have to grow teachers in every classroom, in every school, in every district, in every state. We have 3.2 million teachers in this country, and we know we are facing a teaching shortage. If we do not figure out how to grow our own teachers, we are not going to survive the way that we want to. I believe one of the ways that we will start to grow our own teachers is when we change the language we use to talk about what we do every day. And we need to talk about what we do with deliberateness, with precision, with intentionality. We know that we need content experts and we need people who can wield these amazing skills of pedagogy, but we know that neither of these is sufficient alone. It's only when they intersect that we get dispositions for teaching, dispositions for learning, and those are the kinds of teachers that we want to grow. I've been inviting pre-service teachers into my classroom since my second semester of teaching. I think the first student that came into our classroom was maybe a year younger than I was, but probably the smartest thing I've ever done, really, because every single time someone comes into our classroom, I have to make the implicit explicit, right? I have to talk about why we do what we do, every single move of the classroom. Well, one of the things that I love about inviting these folks into the classroom is when they talk about what it's going to be like when they're a teacher. And they oftentimes say, when I am a teacher and I have my own classroom, it's going to look like this, and they tell me what it's going to look like, and it is a beautiful place. And then they say, when I am a real teacher, and I always think, are you a cardboard cutout right now or what? But when I am a real teacher, I will look like, and they tell me what this is going to look like, and and it's wonderful. And even the kids who are a little obstinate, they have smiling faces by the end of the day, and they're fully engaged. Well, anybody who's been in the classroom for any time at all knows that there is a big difference between this ideal that we create, right, and the reality that walks through our doors. What I want to say, though, is that this space is incredibly important. This space is where teachers live. A lot of people want to call this space the place between the ideal and the reality of what walks through our doors. They want to call it a gap. I think managers want to call that space a gap. I think teachers see it as one of its synonyms, opening. It's an opening for an opportunity for us to do our most important work, because you know what happens? If I have a student who comes into my class and it doesn't look like they have a gap, what's the first thing I do? Create one. We can't teach without space. And this space, I think, is what needs to be part of our ongoing conversations. I want to finish with just a brief anecdote. I had an opportunity to go to New York in the fall, and I was there, and while I was there, I went to the Met. Never been to the Met before. While I was walking around, I happened upon a gallery. Thank goodness I was by myself, because I happened upon this Monet. And it was a Monet, I had the print of it actually in my classroom. And it was the first time I had ever seen a Monet in person. And I stood in front of it and I cried, because I saw the brush strokes and I saw the paint, and I realized that someone, an artist, had been there. I kind of pulled myself together, went to another place in the museum, found myself sitting in front of a Jackson Pollock and started crying again. I happened to have a print of a Jackson Pollock in my classroom. And I could see his angst in every splatter of paint. On my way out, I buzzed by a Grant Wood and then kind of unsuspectingly bumped into a Georgia O'Keeffe, who is my favorite artist of all time. And of course had to cry one more time at all of this. And here's the thing. When we think about what we value, when we think about the work ahead of us, we must remember there is a difference between a print on a wall and a piece of art. Our job, our work, is to see that art for what it is, to make sure that we have artists in classrooms, to make sure that everyone in a learning environment is elevated to the status of learner. Yeats says that education isn't the filling of a bucket, it's the lighting of a fire. My question for you, what are we willing to give up in order to grow in wisdom? I guess tonight a teacher gets the last word, and I'm glad the last word is wisdom. Because if there's nothing else we do, we need to make these decisions with wisdom. Thank you.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.